What do playing cards and video games have in common? Nintendo. This is the story of how Nintendo was able to revolutionize the video game industry with their toy, the Nintendo Entertainment System, which led to cultural change and the start of many characters we know and love today. In the end, Nintendo was able to save the video game industry by bringing it back into the popular light. But before we get to all of that, we need to go back in time to the era of arcade games. Welcome to the arcade world. With games like Pong, Space Invaders, and Pac-Man, arcades are a hit. People love them. Meanwhile, Nintendo, trying to find success, sent a game of Radar Scope over to America. See, in Japan, they had a moderate success with the game of Radar Scope. So they decided to send 3,000 cabinets over to the USA, hopefully to be sold to arcade games for money. Yeah. It was a flop. Only 1/3 of the cabinets were sold. So Nintendo decides to give Shigeru Miyamoto the job of making a brand new game for them. The end result was the arcade classic everybody knows and loves, Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong was a huge success. It was Nintendo's biggest success ever at the time. Donkey Kong was the first game to have any character jump. It had a more in-depth story than anything at the time, really. And then was the start of characters we know and love. 3, actually. Mario, Pauline, and Donkey Kong, which in the Donkey Kong Country games renamed to Cranky Kong as the old guy. As you know, arcade games are fun, but there are still a few downsides. For one, you have to pay money each time you want to play a game. Then, to even play the games, you had to leave the comfort of your home and go to another building to play. Then, some arcades didn't even have the game you wanted, so you need to know where to go, how to get there, and have money to play. On the other hand, you could stay home and play the biggest home gaming console at the time, the Atari, but the games weren't as high quality as arcade games, and the games were hard to play. Over in Japan, Nintendo was creating this device of the Famicom, or the family computer. The idea of the Famicom was so successful that Nintendo decided to bring it over to America as well, even with the drowning want for home video games. But some of the workers at Nintendo had this theory. Since arcade games were still getting some money, video games were just in session. It's just home video games were losing their trust ever since the Atari incident. So, Nintendo started making ideas. Their first one didn't go so well, but then they started brainstorming. And then finally, they ended up with the NES, which they decided to be kind of like a VHS tape inputter, where you put the game cartridge in, put it down, close it, and you start playing. But the workers at Nintendo had this idea. Instead of marketing it as a game console, they decided to market it as a toy. And then another thing to prove that they were better than Atari and not ruin people's trust. See, at the time, games were using art that wasn't from the game itself. So you got these really terrible images in the game, but amazing art on the cover. So Nintendo had this idea for the NES's games. They put the actual sprites on the cover to show you the game's quality. Some examples are Duck Hunt and Gyromite. Speaking of Gyromite, it's time we talked about Nintendo's mini mascot, Rob the Robot, or the Robotic Operating Buddy. Rob was compatible with 2 games, Gyromite and Stack Up. He was a way to prove that the NES was a toy. He was slow and loud, but it was kind of fun to watch him go. You could control it by putting in inputs in the game and watching him perform those inputs in real life. But Rob's success was short-lived. If sales were decreasing, so Nintendo decided to pull the plug on Rob, but they kept the NES. And for some of the games on the NES, they decided Rob was amazing for cameos and references. For more recent references, he was in Mario Kart World and in Smash Ultimate. So Nintendo's next big move was to bundle the NES with one of their really popular games. And the game of choice was Super Mario Brothers. Super Mario Brothers was originally made as the final game for the Famicom, but now that it's packaged with the NES, it introduced a lot of people to a new era of home video games. Shigeru Miyamoto was the creator of Super Mario Brothers. Miyamoto is an artist and storyteller, so the game is more colorful and based on the story, while other games were focused solely on gameplay. In Super Mario Brothers, you can stomp on enemies, collect coins, and use power-ups to shoot fireballs or become invincible for a short period of time. Or both. Super Mario Bros. Was such a success, fans wanted more. So Nintendo released Super Mario Bros. 2 and Super Mario Bros. 3, where players were introduced to new power-ups, new ways to transport between levels, new worlds, and they were introduced to new enemies like Boom Boom and the Koopalings. Since then, Mario has appeared in hundreds of games, such as Mario Kart, Paper Mario the Thousand-Year Door, Mario Galaxy, and even Super Mario Maker 2, where players can now create and upload their very own Mario levels for others to play. Mario was so successful, people made TV shows, toys, plushies, books, and even movies about him. Mario wasn't Miyamoto's only success, though. He also made a game based off of adventures he had as a child. It was called The Legend of Zelda. This game was different because you could explore in any direction you desired. It was also one of the first games to include a save feature. During the creation, the president of Nintendo thought that the game was too difficult for young players and told Miyamoto to make it easier. Do you know how Miyamoto responded? He said, "No, I'm going to make it harder." Miyamoto wanted to be the main talking point, and it worked. People loved the game. Of course, Nintendo wasn't doing this without competition. One of the greatest examples was the console wars of the 90s, which in a nutshell is basically just Nintendo and Sega trying to see who is the better gaming company. Nintendo continued to release new consoles like the SNES, which was a 16-bit console without blast processing. They also released the Game Boy, which is a handheld monochrome NES, which has Tetris, Super Mario Land 1 and 2, along with Kirby's Dream Land. They also created the Nintendo 64, which was one of the first consoles to hold 64 bits of space. The N64 was capable of movement in full 3 dimensions, along with 3D models, allowing for more advanced games like Super Mario 64 and Super Smash Bros. Although Nintendo is known for family-friendly games, some gruesome games were being produced around this time. This was concerning many and led to controversy, but in the end, game age ratings were created. Nintendo was also known for reforming the gaming industry, so it makes sense that Nintendo was involved with these game ratings. Nintendo continued reforming gameplay with the Wii. The Wii introduced the idea of motion controls, which allowed for more interaction. Some big highlights for the motion controls are the Wii Sports games. Then the DS and Wii U introduced dual screens and touch controls, continuing to take gaming to the next level. And of course, we can't forget there's the Nintendo Switch and the Switch 2, which combined console gaming and mobile gaming, allowing you to continue your gameplay on the go. Through all of Nintendo's efforts, they were able to make video games become a respected art form and have become part of everyone's lives. With characters like Mario becoming even more recognizable than Mickey Mouse himself. Nintendo continues to remind us that with imagination, creativity, and some coding skills, anything is possible.